G'day poker people, welcome back to the vlog. It's currently about 6 p.m. on a Saturday evening, and to be honest, pretty much slept all day today after the massive session of poker we had yesterday. Didn't get to sleep till about 8 a.m, so I tried to sleep all day to make sure I'm well rested, because the plan for tonight is to go back to the casino and play even more poker. 5-5-10 worked out really well for me last night, so definitely going to play that again if it does get up. Before I go to the casino though, I definitely want to get another workout in. I feel like part of the reason I played so well last night was because I just had a very well-rounded day. Before I went to the casino, I ate, I had a gym session, I had a swim too. So I'm actually going to do the exact same thing again today. Really worked out for me well, and I don't really want to fix it if it's not broken type thing. So that's the plan for now. Then we're going to head to the casino. Let's go. Okay, it's about 7:30 p.m. at the moment, and I got the gym in, I got the swim in. That means the only thing left to do is head to the casino. I'm actually just going to eat at the casino as well for time efficiency reasons. So we're going to head there now and going to play whatever game we can actually get into. I got a mate already at the casino, and he says 5-5-10 is already running, so we'll be playing that at a bare minimum. We're going to focus on trying to play an A-grade level session for as long as we possibly can. So without any further ado, let's get to the cast. So grab something to eat at the casino. Then at about 9:30, after about a 45-minute wait, my name gets called for the 2-5 game, and I end up sitting in only for 10 minutes and no interesting hand happens. Before my name gets called for the 5-5, I go sit the 5-5, and it plays with a straddle on every single hand for the rest of this session. So 5-5-10 for all of the following hands. There are some familiar faces at the table, including Instagram superstar Bad Beat Willie, as is my other mate Michael, who is probably the best poker player I know in person. So having those two at the table definitely created some interesting dynamics in these hands. Let's get into it. First hand up, Bad Beat Willie opens under the gun for 30, then an unknown cutoff calls, and I'm on the button with King Jack of clubs, and pretty interesting decision. I've talked about on this trip a lot actually about having cold call ranges. I do think it can be good to mix it in sometimes. You don't always have to play 3-bet or fold, particularly when you're going to be in position on the button. And King Jack suited seems like a fine hand to put in that range. I just have to be cognizant that sometimes when I have aces or kings on the button, I'm going to want to flat them as well. Just not as often as I would with King Jack suited. Regardless, I do decide to call in this instance, and so do the small blind, big blind, and the straddle. So we go 6 different ways to a flop of Jack 5-4, all spades, and the action actually checks to me, and it's a pretty interesting decision whether we want to bet or not. We do have a somewhat strong hand with top pair, but all of the small blind, big blind, and straddle, they all have a bunch of flushes they could definitely have on this board. I kind of want to bet out for a little bit of value, a little bit of equity denial. There's a lot of hands that are going to be super live against us, hands with one spade. There are actually worse hands that can call. I went ahead and bet 50. Honestly, I do think this is a mistake, betting into so many people, and probably should look to bet a stronger range of hands, and only the big blind calls, which is actually kind of like best case scenario, but we're still heads up to a turn, which is the ace of diamonds. The big blind checks it over to me, and at this point, I'm just rushing to try to get to showdown. And even if they do have a worse hand like Jack 10 or something like that, they're probably just going to go ahead and fold to a bet on this turn. Not to mention they could have the naked ace of clubs, ace of clubs, nine of spades, something like that just called on the flop. So yeah, really just trying to get to showdown at this point. I think the chances I'm behind are pretty likely. I check it, we're off to the river, which is the five of clubs repeating the board. The opponent checks it over to me, still rushing to get to showdown. I check it back, and then the opponent says I flopped it, turns over king seven of spades. So they did flop the flush, and very happy I didn't keep on betting at it. I think betting the flop was a mistake though, and probably shouldn't be betting into five other people here. Next hand, the action folds to my small blind with queen seven of diamonds. I go ahead and open it to 35. I think if it was just a small blind and a big blind, like this would be a totally standard fine open. But when we're against two different opponents that can wake up with something, queen seven suited sort of borderline, and I could get behind folding it potentially, but raising it can't be that much of a mistake in all honesty, and that's what I went with. I raised it up, and then the straddle defends. King 10-7 rainbow. The action's on me, and some merit to betting out for equity denial, but I really think out of position we're better off checking ourselves and letting our opponent bet off with a worse hand or sort of pot controlling if they do have a stronger hand. Definitely going to check call here with bottom pair and the backdoor flush draw. I check it over to the opponent, and they check back. So we're off to the turn, which is a repeat king. If my opponent bets, I do think it's very likely that they will be bluffing. I think a lot of the hands that are like 10x and king x probably going to bet the flop themselves. So I just really want to give them the opportunity to bluff at it by checking, so that's what I do. Then the straddle goes ahead and bets 50. The action's on me, and we were checking over to induce bluffs, so the only move that makes any sense here is to call, which is what I do. So we're off to the river, which is a third seven, so we do make a full house. And my logic on the turn is that I thought my opponent was bluffing when they bet the turn, so leading out for like thin value here wouldn't make a lot of sense. I really don't think my opponent has many tens. I think it's much more likely they have an airball bluff, so I just want to go ahead and check it over to them to induce the bluff, which is what I do. And then they do go ahead and bet. They go ahead and bet 150, so almost the size of the pot. Pretty scary bet. I do think it's somewhat possible that my opponent could have a king x hand, like a weak kicker that wanted to play pot control on the flop, have a strong hand to call down with. That does make some sense. And the fact that they use a larger bet kind of inclines me to fold a bit, but having said that, really can't go ahead and fold a hand as strong as full house, particularly when I have checked to induce bluffs from them. Now I've even improved on the river. I just really don't think I can fold for that reason. So I shrug my shoulders and throw in the call. Then the opponent mucks their cards. So we rake in this pot, and glad that the opponent didn't show a king. I've got the second best hand in all of poker, pocket kings in the hijack. I go and raise it up to 25. And then a player I've got labelled as a businessman calls in the straddle. So we're heads up to a flop of 9-7-4 with two diamonds. When the opponent checks it over to me, definitely want to go ahead and bet with a hand as strong as pocket kings here. Really looking to get three streets of value against my opponent who has a lot of top pairs in their range, a lot of flush draws, and a lot of straight draws on a board this wet. So I go ahead and make it 40, and then the opponent throws in the call. So we're heads up to the turn, which is the seven of hearts pairing the seven. And then the opponent goes ahead and leads 110. The action's on me now, and I definitely do think my opponent has a lot of sevens in their range. Stuff like 7-5 offsuit, A7 offsuit are probably all going to defend in the straddle when I'm giving them a good price. Having said that though, somewhat possible that they're leading for value with a worse hand, like if they did flat pocket 10s pre-flop, or they have something like 10-9, ace-9. So I really can't go anywhere with a hand as strong as pocket kings. So I throw in the call, and then we're heads up to a river, which is the four of diamonds, completing the front door flush draw. And then the opponent goes ahead and leads 200, and things are getting dicier and dicier now, because not only do I lose to any seven, but also the front door flush got in. So there's a lot of stuff out there that we do lose to, so I am pretty concerned. Having said that though, I do want to defend against this bet, just because I think my range is pretty face up as like a strong one pair type hands, 10-9 suited, ace-9 suited plus, and my opponent could definitely be trying to put a lot of pressure on me on a scary run out like this. I definitely do want to defend with some of my strong one pair hands, and pocket kings with the king of diamonds is probably one of the better ones to defend my range with. So I end up throwing in the call, and then the opponent ends up mucking their hand. So there's two bluffs we've picked off already, and definitely running hot to start off this 5-5-10 session. Next hand up's one of my more favourite ones, because we're playing against the super famous Instagram superstar Bad Beat Willie. He goes ahead and opens the button to 30. Then I'm in the straddle with Jack 10 offsuit, and I decide to fend here. I want to mix it up with the superstar, so I threw in the call, and then we're heads up to a flop 7-5-4 rainbow. I go ahead and check it to the pre-flop aggressor, and then they check back. So we're off to a turn, which is the six of hearts putting out backdoor hearts. This is a spot where I think I want to go ahead and bluff pretty liberally, just because I think most of my opponent's 8x combinations that they have will probably bet on the flop. Like if they have 9-8 suited, pocket eights, ace-8 suited, maybe even ace-8 offsuit. Those hands are probably going to go ahead and bet on the flop with so much equity to a straight. So I really think it's much more likely my opponent has something like ace-king, ace-2 suited. Maybe they check back some of their stronger overpairs on a board that's going to be really good for my range. But I think the ace-high hands are more likely, and the king-high hands as well, king-queen, king-10 offsuit, maybe king-9 offsuit. So I think it's a really good spot to put some pressure on my opponent's range of hands that is likely pretty showdown driven. So I go ahead and bet 50, and then the opponent tanks for probably like 10 seconds before throwing in the call. So we're off to the river, which is the 9 of diamonds. The action's on me now, and pretty interesting spot whether we want to continue bluffing or not. If my opponent did call on the turn with an ace-high hand, I think it's going to be pretty hard for them to call off on the river. Having said that though, they do have a few of those flop checked overpairs that they can defend their range with, and maybe they will get sticky with ace high. And if we are going to bluff with a hand like jack 10 offsuit and we use all our combinations of jack 10 offsuit, we're definitely going to be bluffing very aggressively. And if the opponent does call us with ace high, we're pretty much just getting owned at poker. So it really just comes down to, do you think your opponent will overcall? Do you think they'll overfold? And I can't really say for sure, but I just think it's going to be really hard for ace high to call off, particularly when I have so many 8x hands in my range. I have pocket eights. I have like 8-5 suited, 9-8. So I want to put the pressure on. I go ahead and bet 80. Don't really think we need to use too large of a size to fold out ace-x. And then the opponent is in the tank for probably like 15 seconds before mucking their hand. So absolutely stoked that we do get the bluff through from this session, particularly against such a famous opponent. Next hand up, the under the gun player limps, and the action's round to a tight aggressive button, who opens it up to 30. Then Michael's in the small blind, and he 3-bets it to 110. Then I'm in the big blind with king jack of clubs, and pretty interesting spot. You guys know I'm not going to cold call the 3-bet, of course I'm not. So it comes between folding and 4-betting. And some of the reasons I like 4-betting with this hand in particular are it does block pocket kings and ace king. But additionally, even if we do get called, it's like king jack suited is a pretty strong hand and does well against stuff that's going to call like pocket 10s and pocket 9s. So it's one of the better hands to use. I wouldn't go for it every single time in a button, small blind, big blind dynamic, but you do want to be 4-betting pretty aggressively in that spot, and you really do want to be taking bluff lines sometimes, particularly with the small blind being one of the better poker players I know. I definitely want to be a bit more balanced, using more close to equilibrium ranges, or at least as close as I can possibly get. I'm not a supercomputer, give me a break. So you guys know I didn't go ahead and fold, or the hand wouldn't have made the vlog. I 4-betted up to 240. Under the gun folds, and the action's round to the button, and they sort of tank for probably like 30 seconds or so. It's really deep tank before deciding to just call, leaving themselves about 400 behind, and then the small blind calls as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop, and the flop is ace-7-3, all clubs. So we actually flop the nuts after 4-bet bluffing and getting 2 callers. Definitely running hot this session. When the small blind checks it over to me, I think I want to go ahead and bet on this board. We are going to have a lot of ace-x on this board. So it would make sense if I had a bluff to keep betting on this board. So when I do have the nuts, probably a good hand to mix in as well, right? I did decide to check though, and I think I overthought this one a bit. Yeah, I have the board so locked up with the nuts. I think if the button has a hand like ace-king, they're probably just going to rip it all in themselves. I think if the button rips it all in, there's more likely a chance that the small blind will stay in the pot and keep putting more money in. Whereas if I bet out, then the button calls, I think it's less likely that the small blind's going to continue. So I do think there is a bit more EV in that sense, but when we do check here, I guess it is kind of obvious that we are pretty strong because we didn't take the opportunity to bluff on a board so good for our range. Probably a bit of a mistake there. I did check it over to the button, and unfortunately they don't rip it in, they actually decide to check back. So we're off to the turn, which is a repeat 8 of spades. The small blind checks it over to me, and at this point I really want to go ahead and bet. And I actually think it's a good spot to do so. I think all the hands like pocket 8s through pocket queens that just call pre-flop, they're probably going to continue on this turn card, being that it blocks a lot of my ace-x. Not that I would check many ace-x on the flop anyway. I just think it's a good spot to go ahead and bet and get value from those hands. I make it 240, then the action's on the button, and they rip their stack all in for about 400. Small blind gets out of the way. I snap call, and then I tell the opponent straight away, I flop the nuts, and he's like, and he shows pocket kings. Oh my god, I can't believe he has pocket kings here. And I'm so lucky that he didn't rip it all in pre-flop, because even for the extra 400, I'm probably going to have to fold. King jack suited, and yeah, he would have totally blown me off my equity, and just very happy that the hand did play out exactly like it did, because it's probably the only way I do end up stacking him. God damn, am I running good this session. Next hand, Bad Bait Willie opens under the gun for 25. Then I'm on the button with Jack 10 of diamonds. And I could see going ahead and cold calling like I had earlier with the King Jack hand. Jack 10, sort of similar thing. Definitely a hand you could put in that cold call range. But I didn't decide to do that. I decided to go ahead and 3-bet it to 75. It's probably a bit too loose, in all honesty, against an under the gun open, and the chances that I get 4-bet by a pretty strong range of hands is likely, and inflating the pot isn't the best here. I think either calling or folding are probably better options than 3-betting, in all honesty. Regardless, I made it 75, then the action gets back round to under the gun, and they do go ahead and 4-bet it to 200 now. We're about 1.5k effective, so I do kind of like calling, just because we're going to be playing the pot in position when we are pretty deep stacked, with a hand that kind of does well against a tighter 4-bet range. Like, obviously Jack 10 suited doesn't do like really well against a tighter range, but I would rather call here with like Jack 10 suited than Ace Queen offsuit, Ace 5 suited, something like that. Just because we're going to have sort of better board coverage on a lot of boards that are going to be scary for my opponents, you know, aces and kings, etc. So I do decide to throw in the call here, and then we're heads up to a flop of 8 deuce deuce rainbow. The opponent checks it over to me, and I kind of want to stab here. I really do think if my opponent did mix in a 4-bet with something like Ace 5 suited, Ace 4 suited, they might float to a 1-bet, but if I continue pressure on a lot of turns that are going to be really good for my range, like I could turn backdoor diamonds, I have a few backdoor straight outs as well, and obviously the overcards, I just think it's going to be a hard spot for a lot of my opponents' ace high hands to continue to multiple barrels, so good spot to go and stab at it in my opinion. Not to mention we're going to have a bunch of overpairs on this board, and we do want to balance it out with some bluffs, so I went ahead and bet 125. Then my opponent's in the tank for probably like 10 seconds before throwing in the call. So we're off to the turn, which is the King of Diamonds. So we do turn a backdoor flush draw, but the King's going to be really good for his range. They do go ahead and check it over to me, and once they check it over to me, absolutely think I have to check here. I think my opponent's going to have a bunch of Ace King in their range, and me going ahead and betting here, it really does represent essentially pocket eights or ace king. So it's just like, I really do expect to get called by my opponent a lot. You know, not only with the ace king hands, but even if they do have something like pocket jacks or pocket queens, like they might be able to sniff out the bluff when I'm betting on a card that's so good for their range. So I do decide to check it back, and I think I will be checking back here a lot, in all honesty. So we're off to a free river, and I'm glad we got it for free because it's the 6 of diamonds. We do river our flush. Things get even better than that because under the gun leads out for 225. The action's on me here, and like I said, I think my opponent has a plethora of ace-king combinations in their range, so absolutely have to go ahead and raise for value here. Just comes down to what sizing we want to use. I could use a smaller sizing just to try and give one of those hands a good price to call, but it's one of those things, if I do rip it all in, like, what am I representing for value? I guess a backdoor flush, pocket eights, pocket aces, pocket kings maybe. It's a pretty narrow range, and like that might make it look a bit bluffy, for example. So maybe they do call off with their ace king. So I could see going either way, but there probably is just a little bit more EV in ripping it all in when my opponent does decide to call with the ace king, depending how often they do call with the ace king when I rip it. So that probably is the better play. I didn't rip it though. I went ahead and raised it smaller to 600, really trying to give my opponent's one pair hands a good price to call. Then the action's back on my opponent, and they're in the tank. And honestly, they're probably in the tank like 2 minutes. They try talking to me, trying to get a read out of me, but you know I'm going to keep my poker face when the pot's this big, like 100%. I just stared at the board, and they end up thinking before folding their hand after about 2 minutes. So I got a rake in this pot. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the value bet paid off. Willie would later tell me that he had king queen, but I don't believe that. One last interesting hand before we wrap this thing up. Michael is in the cutoff. He opens it to 30. Then I'm on the button with ace queen offsuit, and I go ahead and 3-bet it to 90. Then the action's round to a tight aggressive player who I have played with a lot this week. Definitely have some interesting history with them. They go ahead and rip it all in for about 550. Michael folds, so the action's on my button. Having played with this player for about a week at this point, I think their range never includes aces or kings here. Just having seen how they play those hands, I think they would use a smaller 4-bet size to try and price people in type of thing. So I think the fact that they're shoving, they really want folds, but the fact that they want folds, I don't necessarily think it means that they're bluffing. I think it could definitely be with ace king, queens, jacks, tens, maybe even nines, that just like doesn't want to see a flop and risk overcards coming or risk not hitting with ace king. So when we take my equity, we definitely should be folding if that's the range of hands. It just comes down to whether my opponent is ever doing this with a bluff like ace-5 suited, 10-9 suited, maybe something really spewy like that. And the read I get from them is that they definitely want folds. So I don't think I can go ahead and just assume that they're never bluffing in this spot. So that kind of makes me want to call, but then again, it's like, live poker, people never bluff, which definitely could be a consideration for something like this. So yeah, really could see going either way with a call or a fold. In the game, I did decide to call, and then my opponent shows pocket jacks. So really one of the better case scenarios. We do have a pretty clean race here and a pretty fair fight. And then the board runs out 10 high. Damn, so they're going to get us here in over a 1k pot. I really don't know about the call, like I just feel like live players don't ever bluff in this spot, or maybe if they did, they would like use a smaller size. I just really think it's going to be that range of like nines through queens and ace king, and my equity against that range definitely means I should fold pre-flop. So there you go, those were the most interesting hands we played on our last session at the Gold Coast. In terms of how I feel about my play throughout this session, I'm going to give myself a B. I do like most of the decisions I made here. I thought I was keyed in and paying attention to what the opponents were doing, going for some certain exploits, but can't go to the A grade level. I honestly think my 3-bet with the Jack-10 suited was a bit spewy, and it probably wasn't even a good spot for me to do it anyway when I had like showed down a 4-bet with King Jack suited. I don't know if I really had the best table image to be mixing in 3-bet bluffs as liberally as I was in spots like this. So yeah, maybe a bit spewy on my last day, a bit unfocused, but not too unfocused. Besides that, I think I like most of the decisions I made throughout this session, and I'm going to land on a B for the session. So that's going to wrap up the vlogs from my trip to the Gold Coast. Definitely had a lot of fun going up. It was cool hanging out with some friends. We not only played some interesting poker pots, but I just felt like being around the presence of other players, particularly ones who were better than myself, really did help me kick into gear, kicks my motivation to go and grind a bunch of volume. And it was cool being back in a live casino environment. I had a really good time on this trip and ran pretty well throughout the trip as well, in all honesty. So from this session, I ended up buying in for 1,200 and ended up cashing out for 2,533. So a very, very nice profit to send me off for the trip. So I did run very well when I was playing cash games in the Gold Coast, but you can't just look at the lump sum of money I won throughout the sessions. You really do have to factor in all the additional expenses that come with taking a holiday to play poker. And I just wanted to shine a light on that because I feel like people tend to just focus more so on how much they won in a trip and less so on how much it cost them to get there. So everything all up, including my flights, accommodation, and the Ubers I had to take to get around everywhere because I didn't rent a car, which might have been even more expensive. It did end up costing me 1,168.89. And then additionally, I lost 528 playing a goddamn tournament. So it definitely did eat into my cash games profit, but ran pretty hot in the cash games and did win 2,776. So overall, ended up with a profit of 1,079.11, which definitely isn't bad for a week's worth, but just keep in mind, I did run very, very good in these cash games, like when I 4-bet, bluffed with King Jack suited and flopped a flush, and then won over a 1k pot. Like, I definitely think that number's alright because I ran hot. If I ran bad, I will probably be kicking myself for even taking this trip. And it's just a reminder to all aspiring professional poker players out there. Traveling to play poker can be good for gaining life experience, can be good for networking in different circles, can also just be good to have fun and try and make a little bit of money whilst you're taking a holiday at the same time. But if you are looking to travel specifically to make money playing poker, I don't really think it's the best idea, in all honesty. I think you're probably better off staying where your cost of living is lower, which is usually going to be wherever you don't have to fly to and book a hotel to. So do keep that in mind if you're trying to save up a bankroll and become a professional poker player. If you are taking trips, be my guest, have loads of fun, get a bunch of life experience, but just keep in mind you're doing it for those reasons, not to make money. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you for sticking all the way to the end of the vlog. That really helps my channel's analytics. From now on, I'm already back in Melbourne at the moment, and I've been hitting up the home game circuit, so definitely got some interesting vlogs to come out on the channel. Also, hop in the comments below. Let me know what you think of that ace-queen hand where I went ahead and called the 4-bet shove. What do you reckon? Do you reckon players bluff in live poker enough for that to be a profitable call with the ace-queen offsuit? Really keen to hear everyone's thoughts on it because I put the hand up on Instagram and already people were pretty divisive on what you should do in that spot. So let me know in the comments below. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.